Hello everyone, welcome to my lair. This lair is under new management. You may call me OmnusI. And things will be a little different around here. Welcome, one and all, to the lair of the OmnusI. That's right. I am the clever doppelganger who has captured your game master, OmnusI. All his little trinkets, all his little plans come to naught when he met up with a superior mind. So now, things will run a bit differently. For instance, this lair has potential. The dungeons above are impressively stocked. I fault some of the designs, however. Far too easy to be invaded, my goodness. For all the treasures that he has, for all of the myriad resources. For instance, around the entrance. You're practically inviting people to walk in. Why not challenge them with a fireball to the face first? Oh yes, you might complain that the low-level adventurers don't have a chance. Well, they shouldn't be trying to get into my lair, now should they? And all the poor, poor little goblins and things on the topmost levels were getting slaughtered out of hand by adventurers coming for quick loot and some early experience. Well, a bit less now that they have wands with lightning bolts and poisons and better planning and strategy. Death tolls are moving up nicely. And we're not just talking about the common rabble either. That one Minotaur on second level, yeah, he's much happier with the new Vorpal axe he's got. Oh, don't worry, if the players best him and think that they're going to get away with a choice bit of treasure, well, I have enough cursed items throughout that'll make them second-guess anything they find. Maybe they fear they'll become my next Minotaur if they kill him and take his sacks, eh? And in the end, it's all justified because this is what happens, you see, when the monsters become the master. No longer are we satisfied with being told to be less than we are simply because of the challenge to the heroes that need a bit of extra training, perhaps, that they didn't come into the dungeon with. No, supposedly, it all comes upon the backs of fallen monsters that they triumph over again and again and again. These monsters are held back. Their true bloodthirst is hinted at, but never allowed to be truly vicious. Well, let's see about that, eh? Let's talk a little bit about monsters and how they're abused by dungeon masters who don't know what they're doing with them, who pull their teeth before they can draw the blood of their precious little heroes. Many dungeons are laid out in much the same fashion. Your common variety monsters are along the top around the entrance of the dungeon, just waiting for something to come through and slaughter them out of hand. Maybe some inventive adventurers might suborn them to their cause, or charm them, or do some such rather than just kill them, but let's be honest, that doesn't happen very often. It's more about how we can just plow through them to get to the real meat of the dungeon, where to get the best treasure, the best experiences, so that you can get more power, eh? Yes. And complicit in this is the design of these dungeons and what the monsters within are allowed to do. Now, you may be saying, but Master I, my monsters kill off the heroes fairly often. Oh, do they? That's nice. It's good to see. But so many out there are afraid to draw so much as a single drop of unwanted blood that the monsters are being held back continuously. That the players never feel like they're really challenged because they have all of the deck stacked for them, you see. The ability to make a mortal injury vanish with a muttered word from the cleric. Or perhaps the ability to just wave your hand and the nano whatsises will cross over space and will instantly whisk away a person's injuries, instantly knitting flesh to flesh, renewing the blood, and bringing somebody back with just a thought. Yes, yes. Monsters are rarely given that kind of privilege. Oh, certainly, you can make a monster seem irritating if they have a thought for their own self-preservation and may have some healing potion, perhaps, which may just have the effect of expending the amount of beating that they can take. Oftentimes that one beat that they have to step away to drink the potion may be inconsequential considering the amount of damage they're taking from a determined group of heroes. But a wise dungeon master and game master may consider such things. But I'm here to give advice to all of those game masters who are tired of their players lording it in their faces, that they never fall. They never are suitably challenged or any such thing. And if you think to yourself, I don't have this problem, my players never throw it in their face, well, maybe just think about some of these elements and think, why don't I do this more often? So, first thing that one can do to let the monsters have their way is firstly consider why the monsters are in the dungeon for the first place. I know here in the lair, the monsters have come and have kind of congregated. Certain monsters with certain viewpoints are more compatible with other viewpoints. The unthinking monsters, for instance, are mostly blocked off because they don't work well with others. The mindlessly hungry or the mindless undead or just the mindless, they generally are kept away, either by force of arms or by not encouraging them to go in other areas. One might think that your oozes or your common beasts that can't be tamed might be treated in such a way. Sometimes they're satisfied with food offerings or things from the others so that they don't go pillaging into the other sections of your dungeon, but oftentimes there can be use to these unthinking monsters as well. For instance, putting them close to the entrance, From the ruckus that a group of determined heroes might have when they're breaking into your dungeon, fighting such mindless opponents might alert everybody else that things are about to get hot. And then you can prepare all the ambushes, traps, boiling oil, etc., etc. So that's the first thing, is thinking about how your dungeon's ecology is going to work out. When you lay it out, groups that can dominate other groups have a reason for doing so. It's so that they don't have to bear the risks, and they can have resources that they didn't have to work for. Also, these other races might have some sort of a unique skill that the more powerful dominating races may use. For instance, a group of orcs who dominate a tribe of goblins may appreciate the fact that the goblins can burrow into cracks and crannies and pepper enemies, and be practically impossible to be countered, weakening, if not outright killing, many of the threats that they'll later take on in glorious combat. These goblins aren't just cannon fodder, rounded up in a herd and just thrown at the heroes to be ground to mulch. What's the point in that? Outside of the goblins' desire, or the orcs' desire for slaughter, and the fact that goblins might not have much of a choice. If there's a smart orc in the group who is leading, give the chieftain some credit. Yeah, he may have an idea towards these murder holes or harassing fire from lesser opponents that won't stand up in a straight-up fight, but may cause the party to waste resources trying to put them down and giving the goblins a chance to score some really bloody strokes before they're either forced to flee or, well, killed, which isn't a great concern over their masters, I assure you. And when you have these kind of symbiotic relationships, it's also important to know that monsters generally, who come to claim any areas, are generally intelligent enough to have earned the privilege. If you undersell the intelligence of creatures that have been there for any length of time and not give them at least some credit for brains, you would have them perhaps just stand there and idle sentries, and as they die, no alert be passed on to the rest of the group. No. No, monsters who have been in an area learn the dangers, sometimes by losing a member of their tribe or, what have you. But learning from experiences, certainly. Heroes aren't the only ones who get experience, after all. And monsters should be aware of the hazards and unique features in their area. Any one of these monsters who has any kind of reason to have incursions from these pesky heroes probably have some ideas on different ways of defending themselves, or ways of baiting and putting the heroes at disadvantages. For instance, taking advantage of unique features. Ledges, for instance, that make it hard for adventurers who only fight in hand-to-hand combat. Well, if you line up a row of archers in an inaccessible location, you can inflict some damage without taking any real opposing fire for yourself. Perhaps the group that fires back is going to have to expend some of their resources. That archer probably doesn't have a bottomless quiver of arrows, for instance, and that mage might be drawn off to using some of his carefully hoarded magics to pick off your less important archers, then wielding that magic against you when you are making your final stand at the lair. Also, most monsters don't just sit in one spot. If there's a reason for the monsters to be in one location, it's probably because they live there for security and their needs are met. If their needs are not met, if there's no reason to understand you're living in these ruins but there's no game, there's not enough food, why would any monsters stay there? There should be some sort of an ecology for monsters to want to be there, and for a particular place to be particularly choice for the adventurers to go after them. Probably makes it suitable for the monsters to want to stay there as well. If there's, say, a ruin full of treasure, the monsters may have some value to the treasure, and therefore guarding, but if there's no food, if there's no drinking water, if there's no other reason for the monsters to stay there, they may take what they can and they'd have to leave. You just simply should have some idea of why your monsters would stay in one place. Now, as a game master, you can cheat. And I'm not saying cheating on your little dice. I'm saying cheating and saying that the monsters are cursed to be there, their needs are taken care of by magic, what have you. This is weak, but it's your privilege if you don't have players who think too much and want to know the whys and wherefores. But if you're designing an area, you might have an idea to provision the monsters with enough food and water and supplies so that it makes sense that they're in a place. If you come across a tribe of 70 goblins all in one area of a dungeon, and they have no barrels full of potable water or large supplies of food, because goblins can eat like you would not believe. Anybody who tries to employ goblins for any length of time finds out that your food bill becomes prohibitive quickly. Yes, well, if you have those resources, you can win their loyalty sometimes. An important point of dungeon information is why. Why would they be here? If the resources are there and there's security and there's treasure and whatnot, that might be the reasons you need. So, intelligent design that way. So many games just don't have that, and so many dungeons are deprived of it. But really, if you think about it, these are things that any monster in their right mind should care about. You can't eat a whole room full of shining gold that you'd like to guard. There's no point. You'll starve before you can do anything. By the time the adventurers get there, all they'll find is your desiccated husk. Unless, of course, you're a conjured monster, which brings us to the magical dungeon. You can bypass most of the logic of a good dungeon by having creatures magically sent in to take care of issues. Again, a little on the lazy side, but at least it brings some novel ideas and approaches. All of a sudden, your heroes can't expect to have a lot of clues about what's coming up because, bam, magic, monster appears, and they have to deal with it. Just an idea, but quite honestly, I've seen it done successfully. Generally tell you, though, heroes tend to hate it. The ones who care anything about, logic and the world around them, bam, it's there because of magic. Ashes in the mouth, really. Quite honestly, if you were going to claim any kind of credit for intelligent dungeon design, bam, magic, monsters happen. Not very good. Monsters want, well, what almost anyone wants. They want security, they want food and drink, they want some privacy to be able to propagate their species. Or not privacy, depending on, what they do. Not all monsters are very subtle. But yes, it's their home, basically, and the heroes are probably going to try to invade their home, to get their treasures, to end them as a threat, what have you. So, treating the monsters as people is a good step forward in creating a believable dungeon, and oftentimes creating a cogent dungeon that'll be more challenging for the heroes. That'll give them a taste of what real challenge is like and what monsters can really be. Monstrous. Now, if you have monsters, you will generally end up with a pecking order. Monsters don't have to kill each other to figure out who's the stronger. Usually a single display of strength, eating a member of the opposite tribe, what have you. It's enough. Most monsters don't want to die. This is another important thing to think about when you're creating a dungeon. Monsters rarely fight to the death unless you don't care and you make them. Yes, there are some things worth dying for, and some monsters have less of a value on life, even their own life, than your average person. But even a beast will not fight to the death unless it has no other alternative. You can show me your most stubborn boar. Most of them will, if sufficiently wounded, will still try to leave, and so that they may heal and continue to live. Monsters are much the same way. Oh yes, don't worry, they may be bullied to form front lines and get mowed down by the heroes. It does happen. Practically the natural order of things, really. But if a monster, on its own, puts itself into a position where it can't flee and has no extra recourse to security, it was a pretty stupid monster, let's be honest now. Or it was the stupid dungeon master who forced it to be in such a specific spot. Most creatures will have some way out of their own lair. A secret exit, perhaps? That's possibly one of the best for an intelligent creature. Some secret means that they might be able to slip out and away from danger, so that they can't be cornered in their lair. That would be fair. Especially if it's secured and possibly trapped in a way that they can bypass. Therefore, it would slow down pursuers who watch them escape out through their own secret door. Secondly, such creatures with any sort of intelligence has, as I said, a dynamic pecking order. We know who the strongest is, or perhaps the smartest, and they're generally in charge. That means that the other creatures are going to be intelligently placed between them and danger. It just makes sense. Even from a perspective of something that's base animal intelligence. Take wolves, for instance. Wolves don't send their smallest and weakest members to go and charge an attack. That's a waste of a life. No, the group will ring and surround a foe, all taking turns nipping at them, taking a share of the dangers. But oftentimes, while the biggest and more ferocious may seem to be the threat, it's the younger ones that will come and pounce at the flanks and down a foe. But even so, the alpha will still get their due. It is kind of an elegant fashion, primitive and primal, of course. But at our heart, monsters really are kind of an extension of civilization covered with a veneer of a primal nature. And having such a pecking order makes a lot of sense, honestly. The greater and more powerful enables the rest of the group to do better, so as a result, they get a larger share. This is oftentimes why the treasure is closest to the chieftain or commander of a particular group. So, if we're talking about giving monsters their due for their intelligence, stop me if you've heard this before. Heroes break into a monster lair. They defeat the monsters. They get to the chieftain of the monsters. They defeat the chieftain. They search through the room, they find a chest, they open up the chest, there's magical weapons, and magical armor, some potions, etc. It happens quite often. But the question is, why didn't the monsters use the magical weapons, the magical armor, the potions? Could it be that the monsters are just too foolish? Well, if they're humanoid monsters, certainly a mace doesn't require a special 10-week learning course on how to wield it. Take heavy end, smash opponent's skull with it. If it's magical, it'll hurt more and give them a better chance of surviving to be a chieftain. So it shouldn't be just buried in a chest. It should be in the hands of somebody who can wield it. This may not always be appropriate, but certainly there should be relatively few circumstances where your monsters are not going to leverage the treasure that they have. Potions are a bit trickier than that. For instance, many heroes have some training in alchemy or the arcane arts and can identify potions, so therefore they can be used intelligently among their group. Monsters don't always have that as an option. However, ladling out a spoonful to, say, a minion-level monster who's maybe not going to have a choice, having him drinking it and seeing if it kills him may give a monster some intelligent clue as to what a potion is so that they can intelligently use them. And most monsters are canny enough to even think of that concept. An orc chieftain, hobgoblins certainly, bugbears, alien races and things. If they have enough time, they'll try to figure out what certain gadgets may be used for, and if you find them, there's a pretty good chance that they've been at least tinkered with to possibly figure out how to use this treasure that's been stumbled upon. So monsters dying with treasure that's been unused oftentimes is foolish. Give the monsters their due. This is one of those things that can certainly make a challenge more interesting if the monsters can just use what's at hand like one would think they could. Now, of course, if you have a story that the item, MacGuffin or whatever, is cursed and can't be wielded by those who aren't heroic or anything like that, well, certainly that can happen. But realistically, monsters often aren't given the benefit of logical purpose for what they're doing. They're just there to hand out experience and treasure to people by... So, if you go into dealing with your monsters from the perspective that they want to live, they like treasure, who doesn't, and they're smart enough to even think about using said treasure, you'll make your monsters much more powerful. Just a thought. Take it from one. You want to think when you're a monster. It helps tremendously. May even help you to take over your own lair someday. Now, not only is the actions of a given monster important, but also the environment of the monster. If you know that you are likely to be attacked by humans, or dwarves, or elves, or villainous halflings, using your environment gives you an edge. you're familiar with the terrain, your enemies will not be. Therefore, if you know their tendencies, for instance, on the outskirts of your territory there's a magical pool. It's obviously magical, the water softly glows, crystalline shards of gemstone litter the sides. They're unbreakable. You've tried. But yes, they add a particular ethereal glow to it. And you know that anybody who drinks or even touches the water suffers some magical effect. Sometimes it's good, and you've had a few of your group who've been injured who risked the pool and came away healed. Sometimes they get turned into a fish, which immediately gets swallowed by a large frog that just materializes and devours the unfortunate. You know that these adventurers are curious types, and they're likely to go and mess with that pool. They'll be casting their enchantments to detect that, yes, it is magical. They will then start bickering and arguing about, oh, should we bottle some of this and take it with us? Then there's always that edgy one who's always, I want to try it, I want to try it. Encourage that. But the monsters will know that if the heroes get into this area, they're likely to be distracted by this pool. It might give you enough time to get the archers up to the front so that you can fire your first volley uncontested. If the adventurers aren't paying attention, you might be able to get a couple of shots off into them. Aim for the wizards first, my advice. Perhaps it'll give you enough time for your cutthroats to slip into the room so that you can knife the healer in the back. Or the wizard if he's already near death. No point in leaving him standing. And then perhaps you'll have your braves, possibly some cannon fodder along the way, to go forward and tie up their armored types. Seems like a decent strategy, but it's very simple. And it's something that any monster who has a shred of intelligence can probably exploit. Knowing the connection of the different creatures in your dungeon. If something happens in this room, say you have a group of Null Guards. Nulls are stupid monsters. They're great, lazy, slavering beasts. But, on the other hand, they can take to orders. So if you insist that when confronted with a threat, one of them, without thinking about fighting, will turn around and report it, they're smart enough generally to do that. Now, will it reduce the effectiveness of that group of guards? Yes, but honestly, that really wasn't their purpose, to stand there and defeat a threat. It was to engage a threat so that the rest of the group can be alerted. So if you have any intelligence as to the layout of your lair, you're going to have your sentries or guards in such a position. Well, what happens if you don't have the numbers to have, groups of gnolls at the entrance to every way into your lairs? Well, perhaps you have a single stealthy person in the same position. Or you have alarm traps and things of that nature. Things that are annoying, and maybe the best ones are the ones the party doesn't even realize is actually an alarm. Say a slope that sends debris and gravel rolling down whenever somebody monkeys with it. If they start descending, even the most nimble elf will send small slides of stones. Well, even a relatively dense goblin can stand there, and as soon as he hears stones falling, go running off to the archers. Makes sense to me. Now, really intelligent monsters will often realize their place in the world. Kobolds, for instance, are stupid, utterly foolish, but they have a kind of a savage canniness, as do goblins and other, dungeon fodder creatures, really. Therefore, they may understand that against a human wearing armor and carrying a sword, they don't stand much of a chance. They get lucky every once in a while, but a goblin, common garden variety goblin against a garden variety human warrior, the goblin's going to die, and usually not after a very long fight. If the human is unlucky, he might get pricked a few times from that goblin wielding his dagger, short sword, stabbing up. But it's pretty rare when the goblin's going to take down the human. However, if they can fight back using things that don't require them to expose their less than admirable combat abilities, think about hazards that they can possibly issue forth that doesn't require them to perhaps strike directly. If you have the floor covered in oil, for instance, if goblins can get a hold of some oil, they might be able to create oil spills that will both possibly slip up heroes trying to pass through, or can be set on fire. Many goblins know the arts of fire and creating it, and if you're standing in a blaze, they didn't have to hit you. You're already wounded, and possibly in a slippery substance that may impede you from getting out of the blaze. Now, if they have traps that incorporate such things, or disease, poisons, it doesn't have to be, Black Lotus poison. Even relatively simple things like, I don't know, covering your weapons with filth. I'll let your imaginations go with what filth is that I'm referring to. But the kind of diseases that can be spawned in such substances are enough to possibly slow down, sicken, or down the road get vengeance on a hero that went in to try to slaughter your tribe. If they come away with filth fever or some other noxious diseases, well, they may well remember that they tangled with your tribe or clan or what have you. Now, if you have the resources to have access to oil or maybe alchemical substances, there are some rather twisted alchemists out there who consider selling to monsters. All of a sudden, you multiply the number of things that you can do to invaders. Misdirection is another popular thing to do. Many of those heroes rely on light, not of their own ability to see in the dark, as so many monsters can, Once you realize that you may have them at a disadvantage, then their light sources become very, very tempting targets. The one carrying the torch, quench the torch. All of a sudden, they can't fight very well. If their spellcasters are busy trying to summon arcane light, they're not blasting you. That's a good thing. And then, if you, of course, can take them out, we go back to without light. And that's a good thing again for you. So, obvious targets. Giving monsters credit for intelligence to strike out where their enemy is weak. Now you're giving your monsters some teeth again. And that is something that you can take to your lair and make sure that the heroes remember the next time they dismiss weak monsters out of hand. This has been a little bit of dungeon design from a monster to those with monstrous intentions. I hope you think about it over time and give your monsters their due. Of course, having a few doppelgangers around to confuse your party members with a little quick assassination and insertion, that can be fun too, but I'd be tipping my hand a little bit too much if I always showed my doppelganger biases, Now, since I took over this lair, it's been kind of a fun ride, going through the treasure vaults, interrogating the former owner. Oh, yes, OmnusI is still alive in his own dungeons, which is precious irony. And interrogating him has been my new pastime. He doesn't give up very much willingly, but I'm working on it. We're warming up to each other, as it were. But I have to admit, I kind of like the idea that people who are willing to help the monsters out should come away with something. So I think I'm going to take something away from his foolish previous efforts from these recordings here at the lair to offer you a little something in exchange for listening to me in this time. So a quick dash to the treasure vault, I think, is appropriate. As a proud owner of a new lair, I have to say, the nicest thing, perhaps, was getting access to all the marvelous treasures and little trinkets that this OmnusI had collected over time. Everything from the dagger that he tried to use to defend himself when I gained entrance into this room. Well, it's a rather nice magical dagger, by the way. Several neat features to it that, had he been allowed to use it on me, would have made things rather unpleasant. Now that I have it, I understand what he intended with it, and grateful. But what I used to best him was a little artifact that I had been given for the purpose. And essentially was the Baleful Eye. Relatively simple magical item. It creates an effect that basically... You know what? I'll tell you what I'll do. One of the miraculous little things in this OmnusI's chamber is the ability to replicate items. It doesn't create exact copies. Maybe when you can think of them as echoes of a particular item. This proved extremely useful to me. Something similar might prove extremely useful to you as well. I'm not going to tell you how to use it. But if you write down on your character sheet that you have your copy of the Baleful Eye, perhaps someday you might find yourself at a game run by the Lair of OmnusI. And if that's the case, and you can show on your character sheet that you have the Baleful Eye, you may invoke it and attempt to do something magical. I very much look forward to seeing you try. But I am the OmnusI. Thank you for coming. I suppose that that fool would give you some sort of tally marks. Give yourself 5 eye points for coming here. That sounds pretentious. Eye points. I like it. 5 eye points for being here with me and partaking in a little monstrous wisdom. And I hope that you go on to consider the plight of your monsters against these onrushing hordes of heroes that befoul the land. Perhaps give them a bit more of a fighting chance next time, eh? I will see you the next time I have more wisdom to give out from my lair. The Lair of the OmnusI. I bid you farewell.